Blue, the color of intellect. Blue, the color of evasion. Blue, the color of nurture over nature. Blue, the color of planning. I recently made a video explaining the color philosophy behind white, and I want to turn this into a bit of a series, so following the color wheel, we land on blue. Blue often gets a bad rap because it's the home of counterspells, but I think once you really dive deep into it, it's pretty nifty. Let's start with blue's beliefs. Blue has a fundamental belief that you can always improve. Philosopher John Locke popularized the idea of tabula rasa, the blank slate. Everyone was born with a complete absence of being. Humans are born without thoughts and ideas. This is the larger philosophy behind the nurture side on the nature versus nurture debate. Are you born with it, or did you learn it? Blue believes that you learned it. You started empty and you fill yourself up with intellect and knowledge, and that anyone could be a genius if they put the effort in. I find this kind of interesting. As someone with a degree in education, this was a big debate that was covered in my first couple of years of university. And while taking out my notes from those classes to talk about it in this video, two things became clear. A, I was an awful note taker in my first year of university, and B, experts mostly agreed that it isn't one way or the other, but a tandem of the two. But Blue doesn't see it that way. Anyone can improve themselves. I think improve is the best way to think about it too. While Blue does have a clear emphasis on intellectual growth, it values growth in other ways too. Which brings us to its first relationship with another color. Green. Green is very much on the nature side of nature versus nurture. Green believes that we are who we've always been destined to be, and there's no changing that. Can't change fate. But Blue disagrees. Blue doesn't believe in fate. It sees the world and life as clay, malleable, and able to change at your whim. Where Green thinks you must play your spot in the larger circle of life, Blue thinks you can always move higher and higher on that food chain. Moving on, Blue values intelligence. There's nothing more important to Blue than intelligence. I am smart, and I will win by being smarter than you. Blue has a burning desire to be smarter than you, and that it's going to use its intellect to defeat you. In combat, Blue is the type of fighter to hang back, study its opponent's weaknesses, try to fully understand the situation before it engages. It's a battle tactician, despite having 0 cards with the name tactician. Which this brings us to another color relationship. Magic's color wheel is so tightly packed full of different ideas and concepts that it's hard to define one of the colors without also addressing how this relates to the other colors. So blue is the color that believes to be able to defeat your opponent, you must first understand your opponent and be able to outthink and outmaneuver them. That puts it in direct opposition to red. Red is the color of aggression. Red will absolutely swing first in a fight. Punch first, ask questions later. Red knows that if it acts fast, it will win. Where green versus blue was the argument of nature versus nurture, red versus blue is the argument of raw emotion versus pure intellect. The way I see it, everyone belongs on the spectrum here. If someone is the type to follow their heart and do what they want in the moment, they're red. If someone's the type to follow their brain and think about the future first, they're blue. And this is how we get blue's greatest weakness. Blue is slow. Because it spends so much time on being patient, building up resources, and waiting for the right time to strike, it can often find itself in quite the pickle if it's in one-on-one combat against someone who is able to act fast. It's hard to study your opponent when they're actively punching you in your face. This is also where uncounterable cards come in from red and green. The flavor behind it is it's supposed to be that these creatures are naturally resistant to magic and can act fast enough for blue to not be able to pin them down and know how to counter them. The key to victory in blue is being able to think things through and adapting to a problem for the best result. And if it doesn't have that time to adapt, it suffers. This is also where we get blue as an elemental color. Blue is closely tied to both water and air. It's so closely tied to water that it includes it in its mana symbol. I'll touch on creature types in a bit, but there are a lot of creatures in blue that either live in the air or water, or are made out of air or water. That's because these elements come with thought. They come with adapting to the currents and being malleable. They aren't as chaotic as flame, and they aren't as stubborn as rock. I've talked about blue's enemies, let's talk about blue's allies. Its allies are black and white, which kind of puts it in this weird position. Blue has a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. Blue and white work well together because they both like to consider the best possible future. White is very community oriented, so I'd like to find an answer to a problem that helped the many and not the few. Blue is just so focused on improvement in general, so it works well with white to find that best solution and how to get to it. White, blue teaming up is very much just smarter white. If we look within Magic's lore, one example we get is the Azorius Senate, the white-blue guild on Ravnica. It has the police state mentality of white paired with the bureaucratic powers of blue. Shifting to the devil on the shoulder, black is selfish. Black sees that intelligence and is going to weaponize it to better itself. Black believes you gotta look out for yourself because no one else will, and it will use this intelligence in blue as a resource. Information can be powerful, and that's just what blue-black likes to hear. Information can be powerful in different ways. If you're smart enough, you can tell half-truths and convince people to believe what is essentially a lie to better your own standing in the world. You can manipulate information to get people to do your bidding. The way I see the relationship between blue and its allies is that white and black have an end goal, and blue is their tool to get there. White cares about community, black cares about itself. Blue can turn either of those into their best versions of themselves. But then it also becomes fascinating to think about what blue is like without the motivation of a moral code, or without necessarily focusing on greed. Blue is almost outside of morality. There isn't necessarily a good, there isn't necessarily an evil. Whatever the answer is, blue just doesn't care. Blue functions without morals, and it often comes down to the observer to decide if blue is good or evil. And it can kind of be morally fluid. Some characters are obviously good or obviously evil, where some characters can be different depending on the moment. Let's talk about some pop fiction characters who would fit within blue if they were put into Magic. A great example would be Sherlock Holmes. He is known for his use of logical reasoning, his observation skills, and his sheer intelligence. Sherlock Holmes is never willing to let an answer be unscientific. This context won't work within the game of Magic, but characters such as Sherlock Holmes would work so perfectly because he does not and will never allow an answer to a question be supernatural. Blue is logical. It strives to disprove blaming something on a ghost, which I do understand is kind of silly to think about in a game that has ghosts. Spoilers for the Sherlock Holmes novel Hounds of Baskerville, a book that's now over 120 years old. Holmes faces a case where a murder was pinned on a curse and a glowing hellhound, and is able to deduce that this was a plot set up by another character to kill the next person in line for a fortune, and in reality it's just a dog covered in phosphorus. This is the part of the video where I tell you folks at home, please don't cover your dogs in phosphorus. Another character in blue would be Frankenstein. Not the monster, but the dude. Well, maybe the monster too. This man was motivated by his pursuit of knowledge. And actually, to double up here, John Hammond, the guy who builds the original Jurassic Park, falls in line here too. Most scientists who are trying to be super smart and accidentally make something super dangerous that might lead to their downfall, they're definitely blue. Fortunately for them, hubris is in blue's color pie. I really like talking about characters in pop fiction as if they're in Magic's color pie, so let's get this ball rolling with Spock. He's a master of logic and reason, and will often suppress his own emotions so he can be more effective. Tyrion Lannister would also fit into blue. He's clever and witty, which definitely fit within blue's color pie. He frequently uses information to better his position, and often relies on his brains to get him out of certain situations. The final one I'll mention here before YouTube takes this video down for copyright is GLaDOS from the Portal video games. Being robotic is naturally part of white, as she needs to follow orders of her own code, but even with that, she is in pursuit of more knowledge. That's totally what all of her testing is. She is blue through and through, which is kind of funny because her being an advanced piece of technology definitely means her creation is also inherently blue. Keeping with characters in pop fiction, one thing I think Magic should cover is the idea of a character that might value intelligence but is in turn still kind of dumb. A character that trusts science, wants to better itself, is willing to adapt and mold to the ebb and flow, but is just not smart. This is partially on my mind because there are a lot of vocal figures in the world who claim they are intelligent, but let's just say actions speak louder than words. But also, one of my favorite all-time television shows is What We Do in the Shadows, and my favorite character on the show is Laszlo, who very well sees himself as a man of science. In the final season of the show, he makes himself a monster similar to that of Frankenstein's monster. So I guess in some way he's capable, but he's also frequently showing how not smart he is, and how stuck in his ways he is. He isn't willing to necessarily keep up on the times with science and information, but does have some knowledge. So maybe, is it? I could talk about pop culture characters being blue until I went blue in the face, but I want to swap over to now talk about how those ideas that I've been talking about fit into blue as a game. The mechanics of blue. So a few things to start off, there's a massive emphasis on blue being the smart color. It prioritizes intelligence, and that can show up in a multitude of ways. In a game of Magic, you're a planeswalker casting spells. The way Mark Rosewater describes it is that your library is your total memory. Every last bit you have. And your hand is what you are currently thinking about. So with that, blue gets tons of unconditional card draw because this represents blue seeking knowledge. The more cards in your hand, then the smarter you are in the flavor of Magic. Blue's focus on the mind is also why there are a bunch of effects that care about cards in your hand or doing stuff with your library. Keeping with your library, blue gets mill. I haven't touched much on it in this video, but blue definitely has pride on how smart it is, and it would definitely be cocky about it. And with that pride, it has to prove that it is smarter than you. If my brain is so big, one of the best ways to best you in combat is to show how small of a brain you have. So blue has the ability to shut your brain off if given the chance. But also blue is so smart that it has become so proficient in Magic that it can do certain things that other colors aren't smart enough to do. There's a bunch of blue mechanics that I almost think of as hacker magic. This feels like your stereotypical 90s movie hacker meets a fantasy novel. Blue gets counterspells because it understands your ability to cast a spell and can mess with it enough to make it not work. Blue gets unsummon effects. In the flavor of Magic the Gathering, you're summoning creatures that you found somewhere else in your journeys, and in summoning it, you are now tethering it to this earthly plane for as long as you need it. And blue is smart enough to know how tethering works, and just undo it with unsummon effects. This is also why blue gets transformation spells. You tried to cast a spell, but blue made it into a bird. You had a nice army of creatures, and blue just made them into pigs. Which also kind of transitions into how blue just doesn't kill. Blue sees killing as beneath itself. It lacks the subtlety of a cleverly crafted spell. It does, however, get cards that will lower a creature's power. The idea being, if I can confuse you a little bit, you aren't going to hit me as hard. This also works with tapping down a creature or permanent, which is often depicted in different ways. Sometimes it's ice, sometimes it's sleep, which just kind of shows how good blue is purely magically. Blue can, however, steal your cards. If it's smart enough to figure out how to untether your creature to this world, it's also smart enough to figure out how to gain control of that tether. Blue has hexproof and other similar protection effects. It's so good at magic that it can give magical protection to its creatures, which is why hexproof shows up a lot in blue. It's important to note that a lot of colors get the same keywords, just for different reasons. So when you see hexproof in other places, it's not for the same reason. Not necessarily. Blue gets flash. It's so good at magic that it can just cast stuff faster than you. It's learned how to optimize its spell casting so it can give its own creatures flash. Blue gets time magic. This is commonly depicted as being able to have another turn or ending the current one. This is an extreme example of blue being the smartest color and the most devoted to learning how to use magic. You'll never see these effects at common or uncommon, and even now they're pretty much devoted to mythic. Blue is the color of mimicry, illusions, and transformation. Blue can mold itself and its creatures into what it wants to be rather than what it already is. This is how shapeshifters and changelings fit into blue. You did something, I can do it better. Blue is the color of evasion. This can be done in a couple different ways. Sometimes blue is just stealthy enough. It's able to understand its opposition and knows how to stand in its blind spots. But then sometimes it's just blue has access to spell casting that gives it the advantage to slip through the lines. Heading over to creature types, blue's characteristic creature type is merfolk and iconic creature type is sphinx, meaning these are both creature types that Magic has picked to represent blue. Merfolk and other characteristic creature types show up more frequently in common and uncommon, and then Sphinx and the other iconic creature types tend to show up more specifically at rare and mythic. Merfolk change their personality depending on the plane, but as I said earlier, blue has a lot of access to the elemental powers of water and air. That's why merfolk and other fish tend to fall in blue, at least at the surface level. I full-heartedly believe that Sphinx is the perfect example of what blue is. Asking someone riddles is exactly what blue is. The level of smugness that comes with demanding someone to answer your riddles 3 is exactly the same level of smugness that comes with do you pay the 1. They can also fly and are slow moving, so it's blue incarnate. Other creature types that show up in blue are reflections, shapeshifters, and illusions. Blue sees life as a lump of clay, waiting for you to mold it, and these creature types have been molded into what they are now. Moonfolk also fit really well into blue. They can fly and they're very studious. We don't get them too often, but when we do, they're almost exclusively in blue. As for occupational creature types, blue fits into Artificer. Blue's intelligence lends it well to care about technology and to be able to make artifacts into whatever they want them to be, or to use them to do whatever they want to do. Rogues and ninjas fit into blue. The stealth that comes with both of these jobs often means sitting back and focusing on what your opponent's weaknesses are before you strike. And finally, nothing quite fits blue like wizard. Blue is the wizard color. Wizards show up in every color and combination, but blue is the pure essence of wizardry. If studying makes you better at casting spells, you are a wizard and you are blue. So blue. If you didn't catch my white explained video, it should be up on the screen right now. Color theory is one of my favorite parts of Magic. It feels so deep in the weeds, but once you get a good understanding of the colors, it makes the rest of the game beautiful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to bolt your birds.